Brilliant. So I am going to kick off the session here. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Today's session is on insights into effective impact measurement, hosted by Philanthropy Ireland in collaboration with our colleagues at Smarty Grants. So for those of you who won't know me, my name is Hazel. So I'm delighted to be your host for this session. And for anyone who's not familiar with Philanthropy Ireland, basically we're the network for the philanthropy community within the island of Ireland. And we aim to create a culture of philanthropic giving across Ireland and support our members across three key areas of work, which is promotion of philanthropy, advocacy and policy, and then the practice of good grant making and philanthropy, which is why we're all here today. So this morning we're focusing on a key issue that's central to good grant making, which is impact measurement. We know that capturing the outcomes of the organisations we support is essential, but at Philanthropy Ireland, we also believe grant making needs to turn the lens inwards. Evaluating our own systems and processes is just as critical to ensuring long-term meaningful impact. So we're really thrilled to be joined today by our colleagues from Smarty Grants, who bring a wealth of experience into this space. Smarty Grants is a provider of grants management software, but more than that, they're thought leaders in building smarter, more effective systems for social impact, which is why we asked them to join us here today. So as part of this session, Jen Riley, Chief Impact Officer at Smarty Grants, will walk us through a real world case study, which really brings to life effective grant making. She'll share how one grant maker transformed their impact measurement system, leading to improvements not only in how their own organisation operated, but also in how their grantees were able to deliver on outcomes and generated stronger social impact. So before we hear from Jen, we'll be kicking things off with a quick intro from Vicky Coots, who is the UK Engagement and Support Manager at Smarty Grants. She's going to set the scene for today's session and give an overview of Smarty Grants. And then if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please pop them into the chat box or the Q&A box, and we'll be gathering these and responding to them at the end of Jen's presentation. So once we've heard from Smarty Grants, I'll be coming back on to share a brief overview of some useful monitoring, evaluation, and learning, or MEL tools that can help grant makers internally assess their own practices. Because while it's really important and the focus here today is to track beneficiary outcomes, we also really want to encourage reflection and learning within grant making organisations themselves to keep pushing for better, more impactful giving and grant making. So with that, I think we will kick off. We're still getting a steady stream of people coming into the session, which is fantastic. But I'm now going to hand over to Vicky to introduce the sessions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hazel. As Hazel just said, it's so wonderful to see so many people here today. Thank you. Just wait for the slides to kick in. Just going to take the opportunity to introduce the Smarty Grants team. I won't introduce everyone because there's over 100 of us based in Melbourne in Australia, but this is the core Ireland and UK team, just to talk you through who we are. So I'm the Engagement and Support Manager. I've got a background in supporting charities and trusts, and I'm now very deeply immersed in the grants world and absolutely loving it. And I have to say that no two conversations are the same. Every organisation is so unique, and that's what's making it really enjoyable for me. We've got Jen, who you'll be meeting in a moment. She's our Chief Impact Officer. She's the go-to for making sure grants are delivering real results. She's got 20 plus years in charity and government, and she's got that 360 holistic view on measuring what's working, why it's not, what's not, and why. We also have Jodie. She's our executive director. She looks at kind of what tech we're using, how to constantly innovate and grow and make sure that we're moving forward constantly. She has a training background, so she's got that unique ability to translate between tech and grant speak. So she's invaluable to us. And then we've got Kathy, who's our executive director of our parent company. She was really the driving force behind Smarty Grants Ireland and UK expansion, coming over here at the beginning of last year, meeting everyone, holding conversations, holding space, and really was intrigued to find out about how similar the Ireland grant making landscape is to the Australian one. So that was a real learning curve there. And then we've got Alex, who represents just some of our training and support team. And they really are brilliant to supporting our clients on a daily basis, and they're our kind of go-to support as well. So a little bit about us and who we are. We are an enterprise of our community, which is an Australian social purpose orientated business. We've been working with not-for-profits since 2000, and we're really committed to social good. So far, in fact, that we've actually embedded our values into our own constitution. So that makes sure we give equal priority for commercial imperatives, social mission, employees, and environmental responsibility. So as Hazel rightly said, we're a powerful and user-friendly grants management system. We can streamline the entire grant making process from start to finish into outcomes. And we work with all sorts of different organisations. We're established, we're sustainable. We launched in 2009. We were born out of working with our grantees. So it was our work through them that we discovered there was a lot of grant rage, and we built this system with grantees in mind and grant makers in mind. We are one of the world's biggest submission platforms. We've worked with more than 800 entities worldwide, and we're very user friendly. We've got 100% renewal rate with the clients that we work with, and everything's been born out of word of mouth because of the work that we're doing in the wider community as well. We're very safe and secure, hosted in the EU and UK, ISO accredited, and we've also compliant with cybersecurity essentials as well. So most of all, the biggest thing is that our values are very aligned with the organisations we work with. We're a tech solution, but we're designed to promote social impact. So the purpose of today is to share a real-world transformation story. We'll provide some practical lessons on empowering our grantees, enhancing data quality and creating learning cultures. And we'll discuss how analytics and real-time dashboards can support strategic decision-making. And at this point, it's over to Jen.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. So I've got my colleague, Kate Randall from the Community Broadcasting Foundation on the line today. I'm going to present, which is kind of a bit awkward because it's her case study in her organisation, but the deal was I would interview her, and she's waving, and write up a case study because, you know, Kate is very, very busy, like all of you grant managers out there. So I've written this up, and I will do the best I can to represent Community Broadcasting Foundation, but I'm sure Kate is here to answer at the end Q&A. So I'll just set you up about who the organisation is, because it's nice to talk about it in context of an organisation. So that's why we've taken this approach today. So the Community Broadcasting Foundation, or CBF, as we refer to it as, is a federally funded, so it's funded through the Australian government, 40-year-old funder of community media. There's over 400 grantees, including First Nations, multicultural, youth, LGBTQIA+ stations, and also funds independent content producers and sector peak and training bodies. So prior to 2022, there was a real focus on outputs, you know, the number of grants going out the door, the locations, the number of audiences served. So sort of very high level sort of stats. And there was the sporadic case studies, and usually used, you know, to illustrate impact in the, you know, sort of annual report and so on. But there was no consistency or aggregatable outcomes data. And so in 2022, there was a strategic restructure by the board, and they consolidated 9 programs into 3. And there was a push to outcomes and impact reporting. And this was part of a sector-wide movement in the community media roadmap towards demonstrating value. So this is where it really all began. And some of the key challenges was when I spoke to Kate about what was going on. Some of the considerations as they started this journey was that they wanted to balance insight with grantee burden. They didn't want to ask for too much information or put a lot of data collection onto the grantee. So they were very, very sort of, mindful of this. They were also respectful that these were volunteer-led organisations with limited capacity and time and knowledge around this area as well. And the data literacy and measurement knowledge skills were very variable, making reliability of data a challenge. So there was this need for sort of proceed with caution. Do you like the crocodiles? I just had to do it because we're Australian and we love our crocodiles. But there's a nice quote here from when I was talking to Kate that this is a community. We don't want to burn them too much, with too much work or onerous reporting. So it's very much mindful about the impact. Meanwhile, down the road, literally, we are 10 minutes, as you can see in the little map there. Up the top corner is the Community Broadcasting Foundation, and then we're in that red dot down there. So 10 minutes down the road, we're launching, at Smarty Grants, we're launching the Outcomes Engine. And this took over 5 years to create, but it enables common frameworks across grant programs to be reported on. It enables program-specific outcome visibility and provides that sort of early insights into outcome areas that are underrepresented. I'm going to show you some graphs later on from our analytics. So you can sort of see, well, what outcomes are being underfunded or overfunded or underrepresented. So we were building this outcomes engine into Smarty Grants at this same time. And the ability to upload an outcomes framework is core to that. So this is actually one of the versions, I think it's an early version actually, of the Community Broadcasting Foundation, who have listed there some of the outcomes they were wanting to track. And this comes from their monitoring and evaluation work. So there's strengthening governance policies, enhancing capacity and capability, increasing resilience through preparations for unexpected change, deepening engagement with communities, and so on. There's a few more there. So they uploaded once, they knew we were doing this outcomes framework. They were one of our very early adopters. They said, look, we're trying to work out this outcomes thing as well. Let's try it. So they uploaded this framework. And I just want to quickly show you what it looks like for the applicant when they're applying for a grant. And this is a default section, and Kate's section actually looks quite different to this because she's tailored it for their forms. But how it comes up in our system is this drop-down list here. So what is uploaded in the Excel spreadsheet, which is highly dependent on the organisation and context, then appears as a drop-down for applicants to align to the organisation's outcomes. And the way we deliberately set the form up is to say to the applicant first, what are you working towards? And then how do you align with the organisation, the funders' outcomes? And we even give them the chance to explain that alignment. So just a little bit of behind the scenes of what the system looks like. And then in the acquittal, this information all flows through. So the first 4 areas of the form flow into the progress report. And then the applicants or the grantee by that stage, they've been funded, just need to complete the progress data. So it's just a little insight to what's going on there with the forms. So going back to Kate and me, what's happening at Community Broadcasting Foundation, they were asking grantees to align to the outcome areas. They were much more focused on the outcomes and metrics sections. There's a number of sections in the forms. And they limited the number of outcomes, because you notice there was a list there. They only let people select up to 4. Otherwise, they select everything. So they really got them to prioritize what were the outcomes they were focusing on. And they collected baselines, targets, and the data methods. They collected that information. In relation to metrics, and we'll get into this as well, is that they made the choice early on to continue to allow the applicants to report against their own metrics. So they didn't set standard metrics. They made the decision as part of the change process not to overwhelm people with the change to the forms have been the same for many years. So they said, look, align to our outcomes, but continue to use your own metrics. And Kate is on a journey with them to move towards standard metrics though. So here we are, we're continuing on with the outcomes journey. In February 2024, they appointed Kate as the outcomes and evaluation analyst. So that was really exciting. And I think very exciting for the grant community as well to see more of these roles appearing inside funding organisations. So that was a big appointment. And Kate set about, running team workshops to produce a theory of change and identifying especially those middle outcomes. So between the ambitions of the community foundations, we all have them, the big vision statements, and then the sort of immediate outcomes, but really what was happening, in those intermediary outcomes in between. So it was a bit of work to identify those middle outcomes. And there was a lot of consolidation around outcomes and pathways to impact. And what was wonderful is that all of this work was peer reviewed by the advisory committees, who really sort of were able to identify some gaps and actually added well-being outcomes to support training and employment pathway. And adjusted some of the language to be plain and accessible. So getting that feedback from the peers added real value to that theory of change and that list of outcomes that's now been updated. So in terms of building capacity of the grantees, and this comes up a lot with many of clients like Kate, is that they're having to build the field, and they're saying, look, we're going to ask these questions, but many of these people don't know what outcomes are or outputs and indicators and targets. So Kate did some webinars with her grantees to sort of explain what the expectations were, provided some resources of examples of common outcomes and metrics, and as I said, didn't ask for standardized metrics, so metrics set by the Community Broadcasting Foundation in the first instance, and encourage people to just keep using their own. Now, one of the big pieces of work that Kate did after sort of doing that theory of change work was developing a monitoring and evaluation and learning framework, so a MEL framework. And this is particularly exciting, I think, because for most people come to me to use the outcomes engine, and we sort of say, do you have a monitoring evaluation framework? And they don't. And then we're there creating outcomes and so on, which is absolutely fine as a starting point. But I think best practice is to do a MEL framework where you've got a theory of change, you've got a list of outcomes, you've really thought about the data you want to collect. And so to do this work, I think has provided a bit of a light. We had a grant impact forum about a couple of months ago, and everybody loved Kate's session on how to do this for granting. It took over 12 months. It was an absolute labor of love. But I think for Kate, and she'll talk to this as well later, but I think it really, she talked a lot about clarifying purpose. Who are we evaluating for and why? And really having a utilization focus of that monitoring evaluation framework. And I've spent 20 years working in the not-for-profit sector, and I think there's a lot of data that's collected, and I think being clear about the purpose of the data collection will save time and make sure it's useful as well. Kate landed on 7 key evaluation questions, and it was lovely to hear Hazel call out earlier that it's not just about the grantees, but also the process of the funder. So that's definitely something that's part of Kate's work as well, impact, process, and relevance. And there was an audit of the 200+ indicators across the organisation that was being collected. So has streamlined that to less than 100. So some really considerable work done there. This is just the stage process, which I've taken directly from Kate's slides. So there was clarifying the intended outcomes, the theory of change work, the M&E framework, and then, the big picture, and then down into the weeds. So coming up with that data collection plan and then implementing it. And part of the implementation stage was updating the grant forms in our system inside Smarty Grants, and then sort of looking to roll out new data collection methods. And there's still a lot of work I think Kate's working through here. The word staged, I think, is an important one there. There we go. So 3 years of implementation there. Yep. So there's work happening as we're talking. Here are the 7 questions. Look, I'll put. We're going to send out the deck, so I'm not going to go into them here. But I think it's really refreshing to see key evaluation questions for a grant program. We often see them at a program level or a project level, but I think there's some really good questions in here. You know, these have been co-designed and co-created with peers. So, you know, I think, you know, some really good questions there, especially the one about unintended outcomes of our work, positive or negative, you know, and, you know, wider contribution questions as well. So some really, really good questions there. And I love the way that it's been ordered under domains of appropriateness, process, outcomes, and impact. Sort of there's alignment there with the OECD evaluation criteria. So that's a really good way to frame up, is to follow those domains, and then what questions do you have? Otherwise, you can end up with hundreds of questions. There's so many things you want to know. So they will all be linked back to stakeholders as well. And then in terms of reporting, and this is part of that evaluation framework, is that there is these real-time thematic snapshots, so sort of diving into particular areas. And then there's a 6-monthly monitoring to the board and advisory groups, and that's something that Smarty Grants is working with Kate to support. And of course, you know, the annual impact report, sort of looking at next year. So in terms of reporting and analytics, I think, you know, I sort of talked to Kate about her aspirations for this, and to use our new analytics function to get this data out in real time to her stakeholders, and sort of push that live data to board and advisory committees and build some efficiencies in there, rather than going through spreadsheets and building things in Excel. And there is a long-term vision to share dashboards with repeat grantees as well, so giving that data back to community. I'm going to take a moment just to sort of show you our analytics platform. Even though we don't, you know, we're working with Kate over the next sort of 12 months to get her data into Smarty Grants, but this is some of the early, we've got some early dashboards that we want to share. This feature was only released literally sort of 3 or 4 months ago. So it's very new for us at Smarty Grants, and we've spent a long time to make sure we've got the data model right. So the first thing we're looking at here is an outcome summary. So this is mock data. This is made up data for the purposes of illustrating. And here you can see we're looking at a grant program, and we're looking at how much money has gone towards the domains of environment, social wellbeing, and youth development. You remember in this framework, we've got domains and outcomes and measures. So this is telling you how much money is going into those areas. And then if we scroll down, we actually can see it at an outcome level. So the idea is that the grant manager or the funder can look at the data and say, well, yep, we're spending a lot here, or we've got a lot of grants working on this area. Haven't got so much here. Is that okay from a portfolio management perspective? And also just for that reporting back to their board or trustees or you know, whoever's funding it. And as we scroll down, this is just sort of showing off when Kate does move to standardized metrics, as the example is here, this is across the grant portfolio. So we're looking at, it's about 15 grants in this particular grant program. So collectively, they were aiming to achieve 240 individuals building and maintaining new social relationships. So that was the target across that group. So what's special here is we're adding apples and apples together. And then we can see here that in the progress data, they've fallen a bit short. So that's kind of interesting. But over here, we can see that, you know, in the portfolio, they aim to have 1,500 accessing new services, and we actually, they've nearly achieved that. So it gives you this real sort of bird's eye snapshot, and if the data is being used correctly in the system, the right tables and fields are being used, this data comes up instantly in analytics. So it's just a little bit of a show of what's to come for Kate and the team at Community Broadcasting Foundation. I've also got another one here about applicant experience, because it was lovely to hear Hazel call that out. And, putting those questions into the forms about, how clear were the guidelines? How long did it take you to fill out the form? Did you feel like the process was fair? And if they said no, let's drill into that. Okay, they took a long time to complete the form. What is their feedback? Include a word count. And this, and also looking at which organisations are finding it unfair. And saying, well, that's interesting. That's an Indigenous org. This is made up data, but it sort of gives you an idea of the power of the analytics platform to do evaluation and improve outcomes for the foundations. Okay, I'm conscious of time, and I really want to have the opportunity for a chat and more. So I'm gonna go back to my presentation. I've got just one more thing to sort of show, just in terms of, I asked Kate for her top level reflections and advice, and maybe she can share a little bit more about this, but that's starting with purpose and audience, beginning small, iterating and adapting. Maybe we can ask her to explain that a bit more. And engaging community throughout, which I think was absolutely brilliant, because it did provide insights and validated the outcomes and also added to those outcomes. So great practice there. And I love this sort of let learning, not perfection, drive the process. We did put out a paper. We did have this grant impact forum a couple of months ago. We launched a paper called Shifting to Outcomes Orientated Grant Making. So myself and my executive director, Kathy, wrote this paper together, basically pouring everything we've learned over the last sort of 3 to 5 years into the document, and it was launched by the Australian Minister for Charities and endorsed by him. So that was absolutely brilliant. But it has been written with our international countries in mind. So I will send you a link to that. It's a free resource, so you're welcome to look at that. And it's been written in a way that even if you don't use Smarty Grants, it will be of value. And there's some little breakout boxes referring to Smarty Grants, but it is actually written as a standalone resource for the community. I've got some takeaways. I think as I was reflecting on Kate's work, and also the other people I work with hundreds of councils and state and federal government, and a lot of philanthropic organisations as well, is all about starting slow and going on a journey. How supporting the grantees in that as well. And this idea of it being more about curious about what works rather than it being a performance piece. And one of the things I've said to people is remove words like success, success indicators. I like just call it an indicator, or key performance measures. I'm like, let's lose this language of measure and performance and success, because you're setting up an expectation that, everything's going to be great. And I think it's about, let's just talk about the data without that sort of language behind it. And then, yeah, I think the power of using a platform, such as the outcomes engine and analytics is, sort of supporting our organizations is really, really important. And I'm starting to see, the work of the analytics starting to pay off with many of them now. And yeah, it is, it is transformational when they start seeing people tracking this data, starting to make decisions with the data. So there's a picture of Kate. She's right here. Over to Hazel, and who might be tracking some questions. And thanks, Kate, for being here tonight. Well, tonight in Australia, it's 7 o'clock. What is it? 7:30 here in Australia.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jen. You might stop sharing your screen there for a minute. We can put people on the on the screen there. And if there is any questions, please do pop them in either into the question functionality, which is where you can kind of ask questions anonymously, or you can put it into the chat and everyone will be able to see them. But there was there was a huge amount that came up there that really interests me. Anyone that knows me knows that I have a impact measurement is one of my favorite parts of philanthropy, and I think often one of the most misunderstood or overcomplicated parts of philanthropy, when actually when you look at real world case studies, it really can be broken down to be simplified and really support strategic decision making. And I love that piece you ended on there, Jen, about changing the language to take the pressure off, because that's something I don't think I've heard someone call out before, to say that it doesn't have to be about success indicators. It's just a learning process. And that's really the most important piece. One question I'd love to ask yourself, Kate, and thank you so much for volunteering your organisation to support us here at the other side of the world. But you had mentioned about advisory committees, and really one thing that we've been working with some of our members is capturing that beneficiary community and grantee voice to meaningfully incorporate it into the grant making process, and similarly with the impact measurement process. So from your point of view, how can funders co-design with beneficiaries and the communities that they want to support? What do the actions look like in bringing that voice in?
Yeah, thanks, Hazel. So for us, we're very lucky because we have grantee or beneficiary voice at the table in our organisational processes anyway. So the advisory committees that Jen referred to are actually it's peer assessment and review of the grants. So we have 3 grant programs, 3 different advisory committees, which is made up of people who work or volunteer in community media all over Australia from all different communities. So they volunteer with us for a term of 3 years. They can do up to 3 terms. I think we've just had a tranche of people fulfill 9 years in this voluntary grant advisory committee capacity, which is just phenomenal. So we're constantly sort of trying to keep a balance there of fresh new people with new experiences, but also having the experience as grant assessors as well, and having that advisory committee experience. So the fact that they're already, that mechanism exists in our organisation, they're meeting with us 3 or 4 times a year anyway, they're deeply involved in our grant assessment process, and they also wear the hat of a beneficiary as well. And in fact, many of them would have been recipients of grants in the past. Obviously we have good process around avoiding conflict of interest and so forth during assessment, but they really bring that experience to the table, and they are our grassroots. They are our, real litmus test and of what's real, what's right, and what should be the priorities. So we were simply able to tap into those 3 committees at, I think, 3 different points during the design process of our evaluation framework, just to put to them what we thought and sense check it. And I think, as Jen pointed out, there are a couple of examples of really valuable, very grounded feedback that they could provide there. So I guess, obviously every funder is different in how you have those processes or mechanisms set up. But I think if you already have a committee or an advisory group in place, absolutely draw on them as your first port of call. And if you don't, it's I think something that's really invaluable to get up and running in whatever way you can.
No, fantastic. It's great to see how you're putting that into practice, because often it's something we hear floating around, but then are there actually any mechanisms in place to support kind of internalizing that grantee voice? A question for you, Jen, and I know this could go on for ages. So there is so many different versions of this, but the outcome versus output question, I just seen there, you answered it in the chat, but for everyone else there, because it's a common question, and especially when you mentioned at the start, there's so many words, indicators, data, but in terms of outcome and output, how would you differentiate those?
For me, it is actually quite simple. I think outputs are what are delivered or produced. So it could be a workshop's delivered. So this is often the grantee does the delivery essentially. So the grantee receives money and they do stuff, they do activity, and we can count that output, the activity. So they've delivered workshops or they've produced resources. You can count those things. There's things that it's like the car seat. It's been what's been produced by the factory, a car seat. It's a thing we can count 10,000 car seats or 10,000 financial literacy workshops. Take a different orientation to the outcome, and that is the benefit of that output. So the benefit of the car seat or the benefit or the financial literacy workshop or the resource, they ideally experience some sort of change. And we use an acronym, I actually stole it off results-based accountability. They use an acronym called BACS, B-A-C-K-S. And generally an outcome is a change in behavior. So they might be going to the gym more often, an attitude change. They might believe in recycling. Condition, they may have a job or not, diabetes or not, a house or not. It's a condition. Where am I up to? It's late at night. B-A-C-K-S, K being knowledge, so the knowledge of how to cook a healthy meal, or skills, a skill of how to ride a bike. I mean, there are other outcomes that can occur, and outcomes can occur for the environment and in nature as well, but generally it's a benefit or change to the end user. The outputs are simply what's been produced or serviced along the way. So I hope that helps. I mean, that's when I do training with grant managers, that's the language we say is, one is an output of an activity, the other is a benefit or change.
Brilliant. I like that acronym as well.
We could talk about it all night. No, and I'm sure there are people on the call who'll go, "What about?"
For sure. No, it's a Pandora's box. I also had another question for both of you, but maybe to start with Kate. You had mentioned at the start, and I think that's really important that you identify that a lot of your beneficiaries were volunteer-led. So obviously not wanting to put added pressure on those. In the Irish space, a lot of the funders are volunteer-led. So they might just have a board, or in some instances, there might be a part-time employee, one-time employee. There's all the way up to organizations that have kind of much larger staff. But for those organizations that are just working with the board and maybe a part-time or full-time staff member, what is the very first question they should be asking themselves? If they've been working on grant making, they know the power that their grants are having because of those conversations they're having with their beneficiaries. But in order to capture it, to turn it into something that supports their strategic decision making, what's stage one? And I love the questions you outlined, Jen, but how do you even get there? Is it convincing the board? Is it asking yourself an internal question? What do you think is the kicking off point?
Well, for you, Kate, it was the board setting a mandate. It was a decision. It was, you said there was that real moment in time where they went, right, we're going to do this.
Yeah, and it's before I joined the organization, obviously, but from what I have learned since, it was part of a broader movement. So because our foundation is deeply embedded in the sector that we work in and that we fund, I guess we were part of a movement across community media that recognized everything is getting more expensive. Volunteering is becoming more challenging. We need to get better at demonstrating our impact to strengthen the case for increased funding, essentially to support this incredible public asset that is out there changing lives. Because we know, and our grantees know, what a difference our work makes. We see it every day, but we didn't have that ability as a sector to tell that really powerful story of impact. So I think for them it was twofold, but that first movement towards being able to tell our story and demonstrate our impact with evidence, very compellingly to the public and more importantly to the government who funds us, I think was the key driver for our board and for the other sector organisations, the advocacy bodies and so forth. But the other piece was also looking to be able to evolve the way that we work as an organisation. So running multiple grant programs, multiple rounds per program per year. There was just this constant churn of assessment, decisions, moving on, funding in, funding out, moving on to the next year, budgeting, and on you go. I think there was this real appetite for, well, we've got all this data, but we also don't have a kind of a very deliberative and systematic process for putting it all in the pot and bringing it together and looking at, well, then what does all that mean collectively? It was kind of, here's a bit, there's a bit, next round, let's go. So I think yes, the demonstrating of impact to build a case for stronger support using evidence was a key driver. But the other one was also about actually how can we evolve the way we work as an organisation and build in that supported analysis, reflection, and learning process at key points in our annual planning cycle. That really led to where we are with what we've designed, I think.
Interesting. So it came from that kind of boards down. Have you ever seen it, Jen, with some of the other organizations you work with, that the grantees almost kind of, revolting is a very strong word, was pushing the funders to start measuring their impact? Because we so often hear from the funders, but I often wonder, how do grantees feel about it? Because there's the conversation with grantees and impact is usually around, don't put too much pressure. But actually, I think there is probably a kind of a quiet movement there to be able to track impact across philanthropy.
I do see it with some grantees, that they're like, well, there's nowhere to tell our story, and then they end up attaching the sort of their impact report on, and so you do see it with some organisations wanting to share more, but yeah, it's an interesting dynamic because people have different, and I think that's why I like this idea of alignment, because I think, a lot of grantees do have theories of change and do have a way of understanding their work, and they do measure outcomes. And so to sort of say, well, you must now do it our way is going to get pushback. Some of them, it's all new, but for some others, they are doing it. So I love this idea of, as a funder, going, these are 5 things that we're trying to achieve. You all know what you're trying to do. You've got it in your guidelines and you've got it in your, your statements, and just articulating those in the outcome statements and saying, we're trying to increase this or decrease this. What are you trying to achieve with your funding, and list those, like the early version I showed you from Community Broadcasting Foundation. They had a list of, 7 or 8 things that they wanted people to align to. And I think that's a starting point. I think just getting that language into community and into the conversation, and that aligning to, which ones, and to be fair, if they can't align to one of your 5 outcomes, then why are you funding them? Like, there should be a level of alignment, and letting them explain how they align, because they might be, running a particular sort of, sort of regional sort of camp for young people, and then you're a mental health org, and they can explain, we align to this because we know getting out into community and getting out in country, young people away from their phones, we get to improve mental health. So I think that, for me, ideally you have board support. I've seen, in an ideal world, but I've also seen grant coordinators go rogue and set up this, and then they turn up to the board and they go, look what we did, and then you've got the board going, oh, that's interesting. So I've seen all sorts of things. I've seen it come from all sorts of directions. I think it's just getting started, really.
Brilliant. Well, I could keep asking you questions all day, but I might be a bit selfish. We have 15 minutes left, so I'm going to move on to the next part. But if there is any more questions or comments, please do put them in the chat and Q&A, and we can send them to the gang at Smarty Grants afterwards. But I am going to share my screen now just to do a very quick kind of overview from the Philanthropy Ireland and the Irish philanthropy community point of view. Let me just share here. There we go. So thank you very much for sticking with us. It's great to see that you always know a webinar is going well when 45 minutes in, we still have everyone that we started with. So it's brilliant. So basically what I want to do here is just to kind of take away some key takeaways for the Irish philanthropy community coming out of that case study, but then also just to look at some of those MEL tools that can be incorporated for grant makers looking at to internally reflect on their own practices and not just look at those reflections from a beneficiary point of view. And it was fantastic to see that case study from Community Broadcasting Foundation and with its partnership with Smarty Grants, and how they were able to evolve from compliance-based reporting to genuinely a learning-driven culture that really supported their grant-making decisions. And it really just shows that this isn't just changing operations, it has to be a mind shift and a cultural shift within the organization itself. So in terms of looking at what we can kind of take away as the Irish philanthropy community, there's 4 pieces for me, and I've realized I named them all one. They're all really important, but there's 4 pieces for me that really stood out. And the first was looking at starting at where you are. So with the case study we just heard, they started without consistent or aggregatable outcomes data, but what mattered was their willingness to move forward gradually and thoughtfully and bring in that grantee voice. So it's not about starting with the perfect system. It's about looking at your commitment and your clarity of purpose in why you're trying to implement an impact measurement system. The second is the small purpose-driven steps. So they really use their webinars, simple frameworks, and focused on just outcomes per grantee, which helped reduce the burden and improved the quality of the data collected, which improves the quality of the impact measurement. And this allowed grantees and staff to not be overwhelmed and to go with them on that journey as they built trust and capacity first, rather than jumping straight into the impact measurement. The third is the community-led approach, which we kind of just discussed there in the Q&A. The process wasn't top-down. It really engaged beneficiaries throughout. There was peer reviews, accessible language, and co-design of outcomes that ensured that the MEL process wasn't extractive, but it was empowering to everyone that was involved. And then lastly, technology really as an enabler, not the solution. The technology is really important, and the outcomes engine and analytic dashboards that were showed are very impressive and add value, but only after the culture and the strategy for that organization in their impact measurement and why they're doing it is really clear. So the tools help to track progress, but the transformation comes around people aligning around what they want to achieve and their willingness to learn as they aim to achieve that. So now basically I want to kind of provide some takeaways on some basic MEL models, which is the monitoring, evaluation and learning models that our members, founders, funders and organizations can use to improve their own organizations from an inside out approach. So these tools will really help kind of reflect and learn internally with your partners and kind of grow as grant makers to really achieve impact. So first we have what Jen had outlined, and which is I think is very common across the board, which is the theory of change model, which kind of maps out the logical steps between your grant making and then the impact that you want to achieve. So in terms of starting out a theory of change, some key kind of kickstarting points are starting with the big why. What's the ultimate change that your grant making is hoping to contribute to? And then it's working backwards. What outcomes need to happen to achieve that change? And what assumptions are you making that might be hindering that change? And then it's about keeping it flexible. Your theory of change shouldn't be static. It needs to be revisited and adapted depending on the external environment, your own funding, your own funding capabilities and such. And even a really simple theory of change kind of diagram drawn on paper can really help anchor your decisions and support your grant making criteria to make better grant making decisions. There's also a tool called outcome mapping, and this really focuses on behavioral change rather than just output. So with the outcome mapping, it's really asking, who are your key partners and stakeholders? What changes in knowledge, attitude, and practice are you hoping to support along your journey? And how will you know that you are making progress? So that's really looking at kind of that social change, behavioral change element to grant making. And this is really useful if you're looking at long-term work where attribution can be quite hard, but the influence at the end then can be quite clear. So this can really support in that type of grant making. Then we move on to this model, which I find really helpful for organizations that maybe aren't so metrics and data led, but really want to know that they are making an impact and being able to show that they're making an impact, whether that's just internally to their own board or publicly is their own decision. But this is the most significant change model. And basically what this does, it's a storytelling based model where you can ask your grantees and the internal team, what has been the most significant change as a result of this work? And this really allows you to see that, are you making a difference and a progress towards what your overall mission as a funder is? And then lastly, we have kind of the most simple one, which is learning questions framework. And this is really, if you're not ready for a full blown on evaluation, but you want to just take stock of where you are in terms of what you're achieving as a funder, you can start with some simple learning questions and some examples of these. And you can take some from that Jen had outlined at the start, but it could just be as simple as what's working well in our current grant process, where are our grantees struggling to meet their goals, and how are we supporting our overall mission in our funding. And this can be through kind of surveys, this can be through grant measurement tools, but it also can just be through a conversation and just tracking those conversations just to see, is there some regularly occurring issues in the grant making process that can be very easily solved that will support better impact. So looking at the bigger picture then, so whether it's kind of looking at the example that we heard from Smarty grants and what the models that I just showed that kind of reinforce is that learning really needs to be incorporated to achieve meaningful grant making, whatever form that takes, and from simple to kind of quite complicated. Looking at data, it really is essential to support grant making and funders if they're looking to achieve social impact. And it's just kind of looking at the way that that is understood. So perfectly, just before we close there, I just want to just give a quick kind of overview of who Philanthropy Ireland is. Just for, we've got a lot of new people on the call there, which is fantastic to see. So I just wanted to provide an overview of who we are. So basically, Philanthropy Ireland is the network for the philanthropy community in Ireland. And as I said at the start, we support our community through the 3 Ps, which is promotion on the power of philanthropy to build a movement for change and for philanthropy, practice through sessions like these, and we do a number of other member-only sessions throughout the year. And that's really just enabling best practice in philanthropy and grant making. And then we also do through policy, which is empowering the growth of philanthropy through the National Philanthropy Policy, through working with different government departments to create that enabling environment for philanthropy. So for our members on the call here, these are the rest of the events that we have coming throughout the end of the year. So on the 2nd of September, we're going to be launching our new membership portal, which we're really excited about. So that'll really just be a space for funders, grant makers and philanthropists to come together, collaborate, grow together as a philanthropic community and support each other. And then we also have our flagship philanthropy symposium, which will be happening on the 16th of October, which is always a great event. And then we have another practical session like today on a grant maker's guide to reading accounts. And then we'll wrap up at the end of the year with some overall impact and insights from the Irish philanthropy community, which is always a great session. So that is it from us. I can see there's a few more chats and questions there, so we will gather those. We will also have a recording of today and a short summary note to be able to capture some of the insights today, along with the slides that we will be sending around to everyone. But I just want to say a huge thank you to the team at Smarty Grants, and also to Kate, and especially those in Australia. I know it's at the end of the day, so a really big thank you and for taking the time out. We really appreciate it. And yeah, that is it from us. So everyone enjoy the rest of your day, or enjoy your sleep. Good night. And Rich, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hazel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye now.